if you can lever other organizations to feed your pipeline and you can scale it so that it has impact, then you've really done something well.
Laura Lauder, thank you so much for being on my show. How are you?
Thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here.
I am incredibly excited for this because I've heard so much about you. I've worked with you through J Ventures. I've seen you, being the chair of J Ventures and reading about all the different incredible things that you've done. It's inspiring, and the impact that you're having hands-on is just remarkable. And I would love to spend these 20 minutes to talk about your journey. I want to talk about philanthropy. I want to talk about philanthropic venture capital. I want to talk about, your work with J Ventures and the different, Jewish organizations here and what that means to you. But first of all, Laura, right before we started this, you mentioned sports, that sports got you into this competitive nature, which is very evident also in the space that you're in today. So talk to me a little bit about this passion for sports and how you get started.
Great. Okay, Michael. Well, thanks so much for doing these. I think these podcasts are just so relevant. It gives folks an insight into how people got to the place that they are. I mean, I'm pushing 60 here, and even though you can't tell by my hair color, I love the fact that I used to be a young person and always looked up to folks who've done much more, and so it's wonderful that you're doing this.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
So in terms of how I grew up, the reality is that I grew up in a small town in Ohio, Midwest. My father was involved in international business, and so he was gone a lot of the time. But he used to bring me back wonderful toys and wonderful cultural gifts from his travels. And one of the things that he was also very passionate about was tennis. And so as a child growing up, I was always very, very enthusiastic about beating Dad in order to show him that he had a great kid to come home to whenever he came back from these travels. And as a result, I became a competitive tennis player. I'll never forget when I was 16 years old, I actually challenged my dad to a big match. He had been playing all his life, and I was very, very passionate about tennis. And I challenged him to the big match, and what was going to be the reward? A new used car for me, so I could drive myself to tennis tournaments. And that imbued a whole passion for being competitive. And then once I won that car from him, because I definitely beat him, you could probably have guessed that, I ended up playing college tennis. And college tennis was a very different experience because I was so much focused on individual competitions, but now playing as a team, that collaborative spirit, and yet we were as a team competitive against other schools, that made me a much better, let's just say, partner and teammate in the greater world. So sports has always provided a way for me not only to stay healthy and fit and hopefully not look too much like I'm pushing 60, but definitely a way of life and a way to collaborate with others in this competitive world.
I love it. So what is it about this competitive nature and this collaborative world? Because, I took part in first robotics competition back in Israel, but also in the US. And one of the wonderful things that Dean Kamen, the founder of it, says is cooperation and competition, which resonates a lot to what you're saying here about, your experience with tennis and now into this other world. What is it about this cooperation that you find useful in your journey today?
So, Michael, one of the things that I found is that as a philanthropist, when I married Gary Lauder and I realized I was moving into a new world of philanthropy, I'd always been passionate about philanthropy, but I had a career in tech and I was a salesperson for an IBM mainframe software company, 370 architecture.
Wow.
COBOL code generators and that whole world in the 80s. Once I moved out of that and married Gary when I was 30, I realized that I had to step up my game in the philanthropy world because that was going to be my new future. Gary and I like to joke that he now as a venture capitalist likes to make money and I try to give it away and I'm faster. So, so what I try to do is try to use our philanthropy to fill gaps where there's no one else perhaps focused in this area, and our added value is going to really make the difference. It's going to bridge where people are today to what a future could look like. Now, in order to do that, that's a highly competitive space, because you have to collaborate with the people on one hand and then hand off to the other hand. So for example, here's an example. Our children were going to a Jewish day school, and at that Jewish day school, they had the most wonderful teachers, the Gideon Hausner Jewish Day School in Palo Alto, California. But what I realized is that these kinds of teachers weren't de rigueur. You didn't see fantastic teachers like these in all schools. So I said, we've got to find a way to build a pipeline of Jewish teachers who are passionate about teaching and passionate about tikkun olam and passionate about integrating Jewish values into the curriculum. So there was this big gap of a pipeline of Jewish day school teachers. So I created this program called DeLeT, which, as you know, is Hebrew for door. It was opening the door to a career in teaching. Wow. And we have now trained hundreds and hundreds of Jewish day school teachers, sort of like a Jewish Teach for America. And that never existed before, but we had to collaborate with all of the schools because they had to tell us what the criteria were for the best teachers. We had to collaborate with the universities that were training teachers. We had to collaborate with any number of different organizations that were feeders into our program, but we had to make ourselves the best in terms of excellence and standards so that we could scale this, because the two most important words in philanthropy are leverage and scale. If you can lever other organizations to feed your pipeline and you can scale it so that it has impact, then you've really done something well.
That is exactly what I'm curious about, because, before, when you're saying that, spending money, that doesn't do justice to what you're doing. You're using resources to make a lasting impact on people. And I'm really curious about this latter part, this lasting impact. And how do you actually use resources to go and transform institutions, different industries and different people's lives so that they can pay it forward and then transform other people's lives? So how do you do that at scale? Because sometimes it seems that a lot of the endeavors that people do in philanthropy, they're short-lived or they are very specific to one segment. How do you go about strategically thinking, how do I take something like DeLeT and make it at scale so that every one of those teachers can influence another teacher and dozens of students who will then grow up to be educators themselves and mentors themselves?
Exactly. Well, you've said it about DeLeT. So I'll give you another example.
Yes.
So our kids both were thinking about doing a gap year, both before college or after college. And when we really thought about what are the impacts that young people can make, a lot of folks say, somebody 18 years old, what benefit can they provide to the world in terms of really doing something impactful? Well, when you talk about scale, then you can think about what Israel does, which is fantastic in terms of enabling young people to do a gap year before they join the army. And it's a service year.
I did that as well, yeah. Not a service year, but I did a different gap year.
Right. So in the United States, we have something called AmeriCorps. Only 80,000 young people are eligible to do AmeriCorps in terms of the funding by the federal government at $25,000 per kid. There are 600,000 applicants. So what a group of us at the Aspen Institute worked with 4-star General Stanley McChrystal, who desperately wanted to create a national program with huge scale so that there are now 1 million young people serving in the military in the United States. He wanted to see 1 million young people serving their country doing national service. And right now we're at 80,000. But the demand is there. So how can we scale that up? So a group of us started a wonderful new program called the Service Year Alliance. And we collaborated with all kinds of nonprofits across the country. And we're working to try to enable every young person who wants to do a service year to be able to do that at age 18 to 26. And just this week, we have introduced legislation into the United States Senate, co-sponsored by 8 Democrats and 8 Republicans, called the CORE Act, C-O-R-P-S. And that piece of legislation we're hoping to include into the Republicans' version of the COVID Relief Act. And that would enable 250,000 young people to do a year of national service. So scale is absolutely critical. And at the end of the day, public-private partnerships are the best way to do that.
And what it sounds to me from that story, it's not just about the resources, it's about the relationships, and it's about the strategic entrepreneurial mindset of how do we get from 80,000 to 250,000 with the collaboration from different organizations around the US, showing that there's a product market fit, right? You have 600,000 applicants who want to do this. This is not just a dream that you're selling somebody on. This is a reality that is just, there's a bottleneck that you have to turn the switch and make that happen.
And there's a matching component. So it's very, very much a tech platform. So if you go onto the Service Year Alliance website, serviceyear.org, you'll see that you could put in criteria. I want to teach 5th grade in New Orleans starting in September of 2021. And a list of opportunities will come up and you can apply to them directly through the website.
Wow.
Making it super easy for young people to apply to these service positions is really the key to making it successful.
Wonderful. Laura, talk to me a little bit about your Jewish identity and why are you so excited and passionate about this, both your Jewish identity, but also looking at it a bit broader, putting together the Israeli identity and the Jewish identity and the different groups and what's happening here in the US and the Bay Area. Obviously, you know, we're seeing the rise of anti-Semitism around the world, which is horrifying. And I believe just last week we had swastikas in Stanford campus. So it's all around us always. And you're very, very involved with your Jewish identity in the Jewish community. So I'd love to get a little bit of inspiration into that. Also, you know, myself as an Israeli and a Jewish citizen here in the Bay Area with all my family back in Israel.
Great question, Michael. You know, in the United States, you have to choose to be Jewish today. People can assimilate and not be involved. When you live in Israel and grow up in Israel, it's just part of life. And it's part of your identity that in ways that sometimes is negative because there are so many ultra-Orthodox. The Haredim destroy a lot of the culture of what is really authentically Jewish, I think.
Right.
So my sense of Judaism is this positive, joyful, values-based identity that I hope I got from my parents and I hope to be teaching now to my children. And what I would say to you is that raising kids is a very difficult thing to do. And when you have a framework of values that enable you to teach them, not only by the texts that are ancient, but also by the deeds, the mitzvot that you do every day, so that kids learn by example. That to me is the framework of what Judaism provides that is so valuable to me. It's the history, the tradition, the values, the culture, the land, the language. It's all of these things together. And so as a result of that, I have gotten very involved in Jewish life ever since I was very young. So I mentioned that I was a tennis player. My very first experience in Israel was teaching at the Israel Tennis Center in Ramat HaSharon.
I trained there.
No kidding.
Yeah, I'm a tennis player myself. Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Yofi. Well, we loved playing tennis at the Israel Tennis Center. And then by the time my kids were old enough, our son was a big tennis player. Our daughter played some too. That was one of the places that we took them on our son's bar mitzvah trip, so that they could play tennis with Israeli teens and folks who weren't just Jewish. I mean, as you know, there are Arab Israelis who also play in the 13 or 14 different Israel tennis centers around the country.
Right.
And the values associated with teaching kids to play tennis, learning the values of hard work and discipline and practice, and then also the tutoring piece, which, as you know, also happens at the Israel Tennis Center. And then countries around the world came to Israel to say, how did you create this wonderful tennis program that enables kids to learn from each other and also integrates the communities together? Who cares if you're from an Arab community or a Jewish community or a Bedouin community? Tennis is tennis. And on the court, everybody has to be a team player and has to be a good competitor. So I just love the values that Judaism has created, and it puts it to play and into work in Israel.
I love it. I love it. Laura, how do you manage your time? You're doing so many different things, just reading, preparing for this and reading on all the different sources. It's overwhelming, the number of things that you've done, very involved also with NPR on their board. How do you manage your time at the end? Because you have so much to give, right? You have so many different passions and ideas, and we're transitioning from sports to AmeriCorps to Judaism. How do you balance your time so that you can both provide impact to these organizations who need your time, because at the end, the people are looking at you as a leader, at the same time allowing yourself to branch out and take risks on other endeavors and continue to evolve and scale?
Well, first and foremost, I have to give a lot of credit to my sweet husband, Gary, who just supports me in every way possible. So, and then secondarily to our two kids, Josh and Eliana, who went to the Gideon Hausner Jewish Day School, have great values and are living really positive impact lives right now. And as a result of the fact that I have really very, very fortunate to have a healthy family, both physically as well as emotionally.
Yeah.
They are a great support system. We are a great support system for each other. So that is the core and family values of our core family is really critical. The second thing I would say to you is living a healthy lifestyle. Like I am now a crazy maniac biker. I love biking with a lot of Israelis because they're very competitive. And so I bike a lot with Zach Renat. I don't know if you know Zach,
Yes.
but Zach and I just actually biked for a week here in Aspen, Colorado last week. And he put me to shame. So I'm always trying to keep up with Zach and Orly. But I would also say to you that managing your time in terms of making sure that you're focusing on your priorities, that is the critical element. Frankly, I hate to say it, I have not seen a television show in I don't know how long.
Wow.
We have dinners with friends outside during this coronavirus pandemic almost every single night. So we're connecting with people, we're hearing their ideas, we're keeping this balance of life with exercise, with friends, with family, and of course with our passions. So I'm on 11 boards. And these boards are very time consuming. My most recent board is the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia, which educates the world about the American Constitution. What a critical civics education today. It's so important. But I can't get involved. Especially today. But I can't get involved in any of these things unless I really have balance in my life. There's one other really wonderful initiative that I've just taken on. And it's an initiative that Oded and I have created. It's called Shomrim, and which means the guardians.
Yes.
And this is a ProPublica for Israel.
Yes.
So this is an opportunity for us to provide philanthropic journalism at its best, investigative journalism, providing the best of news stories to the existing media on social issues, not about politics, not about the military, not about the conflict. It's about the social issues that are at play today in Israel. And I love Israel so much that I want to make sure that Israel is the best it can possibly be. And I think investigative journalism helps a country become the best it can be. So among all of those things, I can't pick one favorite. It's all my baby.
It's the passion exudes from the screen. And lastly, we have to talk about J Ventures that I've gotten involved with as well. And I've been so inspired by Oded and the team there, and really the community that is being built. So I've gotten to know, especially through this show, a lot of different VCs, and I can very honestly and genuinely say I've never seen a community as strong and as genuine as J Ventures, especially going into due diligences with 10 LPs who are each incredibly busy and working together because we enjoy working together, checking the ego at the door, as Shmuel Shatan said on the show. He's also an LP there, and you're the chair of J Ventures, and one of the missions is to connect the Jewish and Israeli community together and to create magic there. Now we're both working on the next generation project for young Israelis and Jewish. So talk to me a little bit about your involvement with the J Ventures and why that fund and what are we trying to do there?
Sure. So let me just correct you one thing, Michael. I'm not
Please.
The chair of J Ventures. That's Oded and Jim Koshland. What I'm the chair of is this community outreach element. So the philanthropic piece of it. So as we begin to have exits and we have some philanthropic capital then to put into play, we now want to encourage the next generation of J Ventures to participate in everything that we're doing. So that's the objective there.
Right.
But the reason why I was involved with Oded at the very beginning to help him create J Ventures was really to bring our passions together into one community, to integrate folks, to give them opportunities to meet others. Can you imagine there are many American Jews who don't know Israelis in an intimate way, to know what are the issues that they have faced as young people growing up in Israel, or young people growing up here with an Israeli identity. So we share this Zionism passion, but we also share this legacy of Judaism and of those values that I dare say some Israelis don't value as much as American Jews do. And so seeing the passion for Tikkun Olam of American Jews and the passion for creating community based on Judaism, that's kind of a rare thing for some Israelis. And so to bring these two communities together, to share their common purpose and passions, I think is a really worthwhile endeavor.
I love it. Laura, for myself and for other young entrepreneurs and engineers going through their journey, what should we keep in mind as we go along for the next, for our, our futures, whether it would be in tech or education or whatever it may be? What are some core values that you now looking back see are a foundation for who you are that we should take with us as well?
I think one of the most important elements for all of us is balance. It's this question that we talked about a few minutes ago, Michael, where we have to have a life that is not so stressful that we are constantly battling our inner demons about what is the right thing to do, what's the best thing for us to do. There's no one right answer. And so to have, whether it's mindfulness and meditation or hardcore exercise out on a bike for a couple of hours, or a way for you to just make sure that you stay in touch with who you are and what's important to you, that to me is a key element of any successful person.
And I have to say that as a young entrepreneur, going through, and especially here in the Bay Area, the lines get blurred, and it's very easy to all of a sudden find yourself working 17, 18-hour days on various projects, and without even having the time before going to bed to sit down, reflect on what's important and what are the priorities. And that's definitely something that I'm taking to heart as well. So thank you for the inspiration. Laura, before we go, I want to thank you for your generosity and for everything that you're doing, but also for your generosity with your time here for this show. I really appreciate it. And I would like to ask for 3 words that you would use to describe yourself, or that Gary would use to describe you, or anybody else that's worked with you.
Okay, so I think I will say.
And I did not prepare you for this, so I'm not holding you to those 3 words. I didn't give enough time ahead.
I guess, I care a lot, so I'm caring. I'm highly energetic.
Yeah.
And I'm passionate, as you can tell.
Of course, I love it. Laura, thank you very much. Toda rabba. I look forward to continue watching the amazing things that you're doing, and thank you for all the inspiration.
Bye.